Welcome to Yesa Rising. This is Crystal Cavalier Keck, and I have today Jason Keck. And Jason, you want to take it away?
Alito, Chima, Chukma, Yakuke, Ishto, Anakma, Abanoke. So I just said in my traditional greeting, hello, hope you all are good. Big thank you, big warm thank you for tuning in with us this morning, and tomorrow we will win.
So, Makuta Minchin Kiyohe, Nahon Say, Mima Crystal, Mima Okanichi Saponi, Watiwam. So I just said, welcome, hello, my name is Crystal, and I'm a citizen of the Okanichi Band of Saponi Nation. So today, our show, we're talking about Indian boarding schools. It's been in the media. It's just been a lot. We've found over 1,500 children that were found in church walls, mass burial graves, and things like that. So we want to let the community know that this is happening. And it's been happening here since, I don't know, 1400s. Since, colonizers came here to Turtle Island. And Turtle Island refers to the North America. Jason?
So because this is very traumatizing information we're going to be going over today, I would just give you let you know that this is not necessarily family friendly information. I would say it's not even humanity friendly information, but it is information that must be talked about and discussed. I would suggest that you take the show and information you learn and deliver it to your children and next generations in a way that they can hear it without forwarding the trauma. And so my wife and I, we started this off with a prayer this morning at the first star, the sunrise. It's been told by our elders it's our time to pray. It's been given to the two-legged to pray when everything is quiet. And so I'm just going to do a prayer in your language from your understanding, just to set this off. Grandfather, Great Spirit, we thank you for this brand new day. We thank you for this gift of life. We thank you for these infinite opportunities to change and evolve and grow and do better. We ask for mercy and healing and understanding for our survivors. Our elders and ancestors are still alive today, living out these traumas. We ask the same understanding and mercy and prayers for those that did not survive. We ask an understanding and a compassion for those that are ignorant of these historic tragedies and genocidal practices. And we ask for an atonement and for a peace to come over the land so that we can move towards a better future.
So, this is a human rights issue. Indigenous people and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. And that is Article 8 from the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. And I would like to say that the United States has not adopted the UN DRIP. And so today, what we're talking about, it's not talked about in schools. Like, you briefly touch on it in school about the Trail of Tears, but it doesn't go into the brevity, or it doesn't go into the seriousness of the issue.
Or the length of the campaign. The Trail of Tears was one small campaign and affected one few populations of the culture, but did not. It does not explain the magnitude and the longevity of the genocide.
And I would like to let you guys know that Hampton University, which is a HBCU school now, it was Hampton Institute, and that was also a boarding school before it was a HBCU. And also at William and Mary, it was called the Brafferton Institute, and that was also a boarding school, and that was pre-formation of the United States. So, again, my tribes were first contact tribes here on Virginia, and you have to know that this all ties back to the land. So right now we're still fighting about land. We're fighting corporations that are trying to take our land from everybody to use for their frack gas pipelines. So this still is about land, and it's about the government. And the government of the United States had an Indian problem, and they had to address it. And they enlisted Christian churches and decided to remove children from our communities and our culture. They attempted to replace tribal values, languages, and ways of knowing with dominant white Christian values, religion, culture, and language. And I know this is really difficult, but in order for us to have justice, we need to begin with the truth. Justice in Indian country cannot be fully realized without a major shift in our national narrative. And the United States government must admit and accept responsibility for its boarding school experiments and other white supremacist policies, including removal. Churches also have yet to acknowledge their role in this chapter of cultural genocide in the United States history. And there was various church denominations such as Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, Presbyterian, Quaker, Episcopalian, Jesuit, Dutch Reformed, Evangelical, Mennonite, Protestant, Anglican, Seventh Day Adventist, and Unitarian. And all of these churches benefited from funding via the Indian Civilization Fund Act, which was used to run the Indian boarding schools across the United States. And it was estimated that half of all Indian boarding schools were run by churches. And most United States citizens do not even know of the existence of these genocidal boarding schools. So I will say that one of the stories that I heard was, it says, we could hear the cries of the girls being molested at night. When my little sister got sick and was sent to the infirmary, I hid for 3 days and nights under her bed to make sure no one got her. And this is Adele. She was a Ojibwe, and she was sent to Fort Totten boarding school in South Dakota. Another story was, sometimes a little boy would die from loneliness. How? They would just stop eating and die in their sleep, and we would find them in the mornings. This is from Lenny, Ojibwe, Chimwa boarding school in Oregon. So you have to know that children as young as 4 were forcibly removed from their homes, families, and communities during the boarding school era. Children were taken to schools far away from where they were punished for speaking their native language, banned from engaging in traditional clothing, hair, personal belongings, and behaviors reflective of their native culture. They suffered physical, sexual, cultural, and spiritual abuse and neglect, and many experienced what was constituted as torture. And many children never returned home, and the U.S. government has yet to account for their fate. So that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing up in Canada, they have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee committee, and they're going to these boarding schools, and they're seeing that they're finding mass graves of bones of children. They're finding bones of children in the church walls. Because, Jason, tell them a story about the priests and how they would molest the young girls.
So, the bodies that they're finding, I just want you to understand, one of the narratives of defense is that these were children that were dying of diseases at the time, and they were dying so fast that they just had to bury them unmarked. What they don't talk about, and what we've always known from our survivors, is they would get these young girls pregnant, and they would have the same children that they were getting pregnant, putting their babies' bodies in an incinerator. So there's so many more lives, children's lives and infants' lives that were taken besides the remnants that we're finding now. And you got to understand that in our tribes, in our villages, in our reservations, everyone knew when their children didn't come back at the supposed graduated age. It wasn't because they weren't coming back and didn't want to see the family. It's because they were not here. We just never could fathom how treacherous and traumatic it really was until some of the survivors started speaking up. and
And this also happened, with our slaves. Like, the white owner would come and take the child from the mother and often sell it into slavery and just separating the mother from the child.
so if we're going to actually bring that up, I just want you to understand another part of the history of the lie that we've been told is that the African enslaved story is somehow different and separate than the indigenous genocidal story. The truth is, indigenous and African peoples both shared enslavement, chattel enslavement. Um, they both shared a genocide, both physical and cultural and spiritual. They try to separate and divide the issues. They're the exact same issues. The way that Africans were assimilated coming over from their continent, not allowed to pray in their languages, not allowed to practice their traditions, is the same thing that was going on in the assimilation here. And I tell people, like our elders will tell us an oral history that's never really spoken about in the books of how they would take the indigenous men, like they had this saying that the slave ships would never leave unfull, and so they would bring the African people for chattel slavery here, and then when they would go back, they'd fill it with indigenous men who they would bring out to enslavement in Europe, enslavement on the African continent at the actual slave trading camps and colonies. And so, you what you got is you got a lot of African men on plantations here, pairing up with indigenous enslaved people that were kidnapped from their tribes and villages, and that's why you have African American, Black indigenous or Afro indigenous today that still know a lot about their cultures because the women would teach the indigenous values and cultures to their mixed race children. Meanwhile, the African women would be on the Caribbean islands and in Europe, paired up often with indigenous men. So the teachings and the cultures had a more African uh,
Okay.
no, not
Yeah.
okay.
So
You take it from here.
we
I'm trying to stay in the prayer and I'm trying to stay in the positivity and I'm trying to educate, but there's just a lot to say in very little time.
so we will talk about Black Indians and mixed natives either next week or the week after. So we have to tell the whole truth about this. And beginning in 1819, with the Indian Civilization Fund Act and the Peace Policy of 1869, the United States, in concert with several Christian denominations, adopted this boarding school policy that expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and reprogram of American Indian and Alaska Native children. And they called it Kill the Indian, Save the Man policy. And at the same time, which was at the end of the 19th century, the United States military hunted bison to near extinction to eliminate a major source of food sustenance for Native people. One U.S. Army leader is said to have ordered his troops to kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. And while this effort sought to eliminate Indian nations by starving indigenous economies, boarding schools were even more insidious. The intent was to eliminate Indians by removing all traces of tribal cultures, language, spiritual traditions, family ties, etc., and replacing them with European Christian ideals of civilization, religion, and culture. We don't know how many children were removed. From the first 20 years of the boarding school policy, it was an estimated 20,000 children. And only 25 years later, that number more than tripled to 60,000 children. And that was by 1925. And so even though there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that I was talking about earlier, founded in Canada in 2010, it shed light on the harm that how this policy was used and the way it was carried out. However, It's been swept under the rug and ignored by the public and left out of textbooks in the U.S. history. So we didn't learn about this in school. And until we continue to bring the harms of the past into the light, we can begin to create healing for all who were and continue to be impacted. And I just want to say that here on the East Coast, like in our tribes, we often we didn't go to boarding schools.
You went to boarding schools, but of a different nature.
Right.
Well,
it was
you
like
went to
more
boarding schools centuries before, so you're already assimilated.
right. We were assimilated, but what they did was they erased our race. Right. We were no longer Indians, and that was due to the eugenics movement. And we were blended into the black community.
And white.
And if we were light enough to pass, you blended into the white community. And then that's how they erased you out. They genocided us out. We call that paper genocide. But racism in Native America and Alaska Native experience is deeply connected to genocide, literal and cultural, as well as the loss of land through forced removal and coercion. Again, like the pipeline, they're coercing people, giving them money, flashing money in front of their face to take their land for this pipe that's exporting fracked gas. And again, it is a genocide, because if you don't believe this, these chemicals or this gas causes, health problems, look at the cancer clusters that are popping up. Look at the explosions that are happening. Look at all of the bad things that are happening. Look at the climate change that is happening.
I just want to say there is a subtle difference. The only reason they're flashing money now is because money is the root of all evil that our modern society seems to be so ambitious to gain. And back then they didn't need to flash money. All they needed to do was say, we're not going to massacre this village. We're not going to starve you. They used rations, that they had grown people dependent on after taking their fishing, hunting, and gaming opportunities away from them in these small reservations and concentration camps, really. So I just don't want you to have people thinking that they were flashing money back then.
Yeah, they were not flashing money. They were just taking you straight out. But I wanted to talk about, it's a system of domination, right? And, briefly we talked on the viewpoint about historical trauma and the 6 stages of it. But I want to talk about Indian domination. So, child removal systems, right? This is people coming into your community, removing your children. They were covered up as mission schools, boarding schools, Indian schools, day schools, military schools, fort schools, labor schools and camps, sanatoriums, adoption, foster placements, orphanages, detention or reform schools. And so these are way people just covered up how they removed the children from their families. And when you remove a child and put them in a non-Indian family or a non-Indian environment, they wouldn't be getting to know other Indian people as they would, in their family. And so we're just trying to fully assimilate the children. Let me see here. What else can we talk about? So after the boarding schools kind of fell out of favor, that's when they started to do taking children and placing them with non-native families, and they will be placed in a middle class family. And
that's not past tense. That goes on today.
Yeah, it still happens.
Even with the what was the act to protect children?
Indian Child Welfare Act.
Yeah, even with the Indian Child Welfare Act, there are several indigenous law firms that still have to fight to make sure that act is placed, and there's still a deep connection between big pharma taking reservation kids, putting them in these non-native foster families and adoption families, and then those families have a contract with big pharma, and they say, oh, well, you gave us the kid and they got ADHD and they got all these issues. And so they're putting all those psychiatric drugs. I mean, it runs deep, y'all, and I would urge you to do your own investigation, because we can't explain how deep it runs in a 30-minute show. But This just let this just be the start, and let yourself self educate on these issues, because it is out there. It's just very hidden. It's very behind the scenes.
And I just want to say Native children are still placed in foster care at higher rates per capita than any other ethnic group, effectively removing them from their communities. So this is still happening today. Kill the Indian to save the man. Today, the government is still taking our children. It's race based, systematic removal of children, which is an ongoing cultural genocide. Again, you have people trying to learn their native histories, trying to reconnect to their culture that was lost or stolen from them. And, we have to break the silence and begin the healing. Um,
You have enough time to touch on the 6 stages generational trauma?
I can touch on it. We have 4.5 minutes left. So I can talk about the 6 phases of historical, unresolved grief, traumatic events, inflicting a wounding on the soul that lasts through generations. So this is generational trauma. So the first is contact. This happened back, pre 1492. Invasion, colonization, and disease. The second is invasion and war period. This is when the genocide started on our Indian family. The third is economic competition, sustenance loss, physical and spiritual. So that's when they were killing off all of our food sources like the buffalo, putting us on desolate reservations where nothing grows. It's just dry, infertile soil. However, the natives, they were pretty successful at turning this fertile soil, non-fertile soil to fertile, and we were, active competition for the United States. So they took it away from us again. And then it was subjugation and reservation period, forced dependency on the United States. So this is like right around the Trail of Tears. And, they moved the people from the east out to the west, and the people who did not go on the Trail of Tears, they hid out in the rolling hills of the Piedmonts. They blended into white or black communities. They also hid out in swamps, all while trying to retain their cultural identity, but it's very difficult. And the boarding school period, which is cultural genocide. And then the final one, which is happening today, forced relocation termination period, a systematic marginalization and legal erasure. So again, that's like changing somebody's race, telling them that they are not Indian. It's just a lot of trauma that's been happening. We have about 3 minutes left, Jason. Anything else you want to talk about? I do believe this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue and touch back on, so we can talk about it, because it's such a broad topic, and this is the first time that many of you probably have heard about this, and all these atrocities that's been happening. It's just horrible. Jason?
I just want to thank you again for chiming in to Yesa Rising, which means the people rising, or more specifically, a rising of the people. Thank you for all your support, folks. This is Jason Crazy Bear Keck and Crystal Red Bear Keck, Cavalier Keck, and we just want to help you be educated, understand, and join us in solidarity of these. All of these things we're trying to do for the people, trying to keep these toxic things out of our areas, off our farms, out of our waters, out of our lands, out of our hills, out of our people's diets and environment and breathing air. We are trying to bring, environmental racism, law enforcement racism, education racism, medical field racism, like all of these things. They continue not because of necessarily bad people's intentions nowadays, more so because of the systems that were in place back then that we never really dismantled. We just started telling people to act and think differently, so you can have somebody totally non-racist in a racist systemic job, and the same results will happen to the people. So just be aware, self-educate, and pray for us, because we are definitely praying for y'all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and catch us next Monday at 1 p.m. on WKBY 1080 Inspirational Radio.